So, today's lecture will be about in-class essays. These cause a lot of people apprehension and they worry about them. And I would just say a lot of that is misplaced in a lack of preparation. But if you do prepare both by actually going to class and studying and knowing how to approach these assignments, they can be a pretty straightforward and easy assignment. So why is it that we instructors inflict these upon our students? Well, there is limitations to what can be gleaned in regards to your students' awareness and knowledge by multiple choice bubble tests. Some concepts go beyond the scope of that to where, spelling it out in a multiple choice would actually kind of give a lot of it away. So we really need to see if you truly grasp and understand more complex topics. A lot of your future occupations and jobs will require experience before you sign on. And while, the in-class essay is not a simulation of any complicated activities, the pressure involved in it will kind of help prepare you and get you to be at least somewhat familiar with that part of things. Sometimes you just have to do it and take the jump, but with an in-class essay, you at least get a practice jump beforehand. You'll have to synthesize in these essays, and that is, present your knowledge specifically, but also get to talking about your analysis and understanding of, the connections and whatnot between these complicated concepts. So the best way to prepare is to at first start with a study sheet. You want to, if you're trying to memorize everything, you're going to be unsuccessful. But you have an easier time working through really advanced concepts and even not so advanced concepts and what borders on trivia by having some kind of organization to your approach. If you can, think of your knowledge as building a house. If you have to build a new house just from scratch, that's one kind of ordeal. But it's eminently easier to add on to existing construction or add on top of it, whether or not that becomes, dangerous or not. And so by having a basic knowledge, which then you add on, you can then just have an easier time remembering and explaining such concepts. Your notes, handouts, past exams, if you have access to them, and readings will help you organize and plan out your study sheet. Again, you're not writing the entire details of it. You're trying to do like an outline for an essay, but at the end, after you've learned everything. You might want to try, rather than just listing terms, some kind of visual, outlines, timelines, compare and contrast charts, relationship charts. These can help you visualize the information and not just write it down. Again, because you're trying to explore the not so obvious connections or the deeper connections, you probably will push past the basic information to those deeper issues at work. A timeline is a great way to help yourself remember and learn a lot of important dates and key facts and figures, because everything happens like a set of dominoes. They lead to the next one. If you might need to examine, all of the wars that America's been involved in, well, we have, more recent ones and we have early ones, but, all of those conflicts are predicated by previous conflicts as well. And so if you're able to illustrate that and talk about that, you'll be more impressive to your instructor. You might also then include definitions, facts, principles, theories, events in these study sheets. I do want to say there's not a silver bullet to in-class essays. A lot of this is focused on study techniques because you'll have to know what you're talking about before you can write it down. If you fake your way through these concepts, well, you're going to not be successful unless you deal with more advanced, trickier concepts. So study, know what you're talking about, and figure out what you want to say. You have very limited time, so you can present as clearly and effectively your ideas. That'll help you in the long run. So you'll want to predict what questions you might encounter. And usually they'll talk about general topics, themes, or patterns, which then you'll have to illustrate with specific instances or examples. Again, not every single one of them, but several of them. You have to give the details. You have to categorize things. Categorizing is a good way both to learn and a good way to present a deeper understanding. A good way to start if you're still completely lost is look at your class syllabus. Go to the list of lectures and class topics, and all of those are fairly vague and completely unknown at the beginning of class, but towards the end you should remember more or less what you can talk about in those chapters and sections which you're unfamiliar with. That's where you need to flag for deeper review. If you have access to other exams, this will help you kind of work out, although I don't know how many instructors do that. However, many of them will comment specifically on things that you should be paying attention to, so make sure to take those notes, and they might also tell you exactly what the questions will be. Of course, there are just some specific tips to the actual test taking, and this applies to any kind of standardized test as well that you're not taking in a familiar class. Get there early. A lot of, again, later standardized tests with essay components do require some kind of security involved, and so they will not let you in once the time has passed. Furthermore, it just puts me in a negative disposition if my students show up late to the final. Again, I have added opinions towards showing up later, not the whole semester, but the final is probably one last effort to then show your instructor you're taking things seriously, unless you're not. Sometimes final exam schedules are slightly different than regular class time, and that's not something you want your instructor to overlook in regards to your performance. The book advises you to sit towards the front, but I don't know how much I'd follow that advice. Certainly you don't want to sit in the back, but if you're the type of person who always, keeps track of who's coming into the room and you're turning around whenever someone walks in, being at the front will distract you versus being somewhere you can see it without looking up might not. You'll want to look over the whole exam once you get it and think about your strategy, if you want to answer some questions first, or you want to focus on the harder parts, or what your essay topics can be so that you can be the most effective. Sometimes the tests can help you out as well. Obviously answer the easy questions, but the harder ones might still have some kind of correctable factual information which can pop up later in your essay. And especially with more all-encompassing things, they can't just ask you about some things and ignore other things. All of it's useful somewhere. Don't write out the question. And remember, your first draft is going to be your final draft, so make it as presentable as you can. Think of your audience and your purpose. Obviously, it's answering the question. Obviously, it's not merely talking about the subject, but trying to show your instructor that you actually learned, you actually understood, you didn't waste anybody's time. And so the opportunity to show off your knowledge that's not tied specifically to the question, but still relatable and still linkable, that's a possibility. You will definitely want to plan what you're going to say and organize it as well. Organization is a key of good writing, as this class has impressed upon you. And so a poorly written, literally written response that is genius, amazing, awesome, will still be hard to read. Granted, an expertly, beautifully written essay question response will not overcome a lack of substance, but it will make the substance that is there appear more effective. So make sure you write effectively, especially in a writing class. Now, this is a sample time budget presented in the book, and you'll notice that brainstorming is separate from outlining because, think of all your responses, your concepts, the stuff that is appropriate to talk about in the essay question, and then go back and organize it, outline it, then get to writing it. Then if you have a time, come up with a good thesis to put on the top of it, maybe skip a few lines at the beginning, and consider if you need a conclusion or not. Although in this case, the conclusion refers to not a final paragraph, but a statement about your understanding and tying together all of the facts. The conclusion you've reached as a result of thinking about everything the question asks you to read about. If you have time, proofread and refine your statements. But again, you'll need to do less of that if you do a little more planning early on. It's important to not skip, though. You can catch those careless mistakes. The question, of course, will guide your response. Look for the key words: compare, contrast, define, discuss, evaluate, so on and so forth. Now, these are all not just think about or write down your thoughts. They focus or guide you specifically with what to write about. And granted, while something like define, explain, summarize are similar, they tell you if you can put more things in your own words or run through things quickly, if you want to focus on the events rather than, too many details, or if you should focus on, giving a more specific, clear definition. Consequently, illustrate is taking a complicated, vague, general concept and giving you specific examples. Justify obviously has some value judgments in there. You're trying to show what you know as well, though, besides answering these questions, so whatever you can put in there would be useful. Obviously, write complete, correct sentences, cross out your mistakes neatly, and then don't worry too much about an intro or conclusion. A very brief one would be acceptable, and focus on answering the question satisfiably more so. Make sure your thesis is clear. This could be just a rewording of the prompt with the points you're going to focus on. Topic sentences are definitely a must. Make sure each paragraph has something that says what it will be about and how it connects to the previous paragraph as well, or if it's totally a new unconnected topic that still is necessary, say, well, we talked about those things, now we're going to talk about this. It's always useful if you're unsure to generalize rather than leave out answers. So I'm going to get this wrong probably because I don't have my notes here that I should, but let me give you an example. When was women's suffrage passed? Now, here for me, this is always kind of tricky because I believe 19th Amendment, 1919 or 1920, again. So if you give around the time period where that happens, though, you can have a chance to show off your knowledge. It was around after World War I. It was, in the setup to the big social change of the 1920s. And Prohibition, the amendment before it, was the result of feminist movements which were tied to the temperance movement, and after they exercised that strength, then were able to obviously get suffrage. Again, not a history teacher, an English teacher, but all of that is better, and you can talk about more of the history in that response than if you just simply answered the date or if you left it off entirely. Get close. If you are writing about molarity, and so you want to, and you don't know how to spell Avogadro's number, well, obviously do the best you can, explain the significance of it, and if they say, missing one of the D's or the V's, or you say avocado's number, they might know what you're talking about, and that's better than leaving that part completely blank. Distinguish between the groups that you're going to discuss. If you're having to classify things, make sure your organization is clear early on. You say, we'll talk about this, then this, then this. Proofread if you have the chance. And again, make sure to demonstrate your knowledge with your answers. Show off, if you will. So again, I'm not going to do this like I would in a class, but I do want to raise one last important thing about in-class essay exams and questions. Sometimes a question leaves stuff out and it's begging you to respond to it, to talk about what that is, or risk getting a lower grade. So let me look at these sample essay questions. The first one, define and illustrate the meaning of the term freedom of the press. Well, that does not bring up the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, or the Constitution, and so you'll have to speak to varying levels or degrees about that. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time answering that question, even if you do get it right. If we think about choose a recent television advertisement that describes its rational and emotional appeal, well, that's talking about pathos and logos, and so you might have to bring up the concepts as well as, whatever terminology is associated with those concepts. There's lots with logos, not so much with pathos, but you get the deal. When if we talk about the last question, evaluate current news program in terms of breadth and depth of coverage, objectivity, political and social viewpoints, there's bias, there's certain perspectives you might have, conservative or liberal, to talk about. And so all that is implied by the question, which if you leave out, you're probably in B or C territory.